Picture this, it's 2017. Argentina just spent $500 million building a state-of-the-art electrified railway line between Buenos Aires and La Plata. Brand new tracks, gleaming stations, overhead electrical wires humming with 25,000 volts of power, and rolling down those pristine rails. Trains from 1985? Welcome to one of the most beautifully bizarre stories in modern railway history. The Golden Age setting the scene. To understand how Argentina ended up here, we need to rewind the clock all the way back to the late 1800s. And folks, Argentina wasn't just any country back then, it was an absolute powerhouse. Picture the late 19th and early 20th centuries. While America was building its transcontinental railroad, Argentina was doing something equally ambitious across the southern hemisphere. British and Italian companies poured into the country, laying down track after track after track. By the mid-20th century, Argentina had built one of the most extensive railway networks on the planet, over 29,000 miles of rail. That's enough track to circle the Earth more than once. These weren't just railways. They were the arteries of a nation. Wheat and meat from the fertile Pampas traveled to Buenos Aires. Wool from Patagonia made its way to international markets. The trains quite literally built Argentina into what people called the granary of the world. The country was projected to become one of the richest nations on Earth, and the trains were the reason why. The grand stations of Buenos Aires Constitution, built in 1887, and the magnificent Retiro station from 1915, weren't just functional. They were cathedrals of progress, mixing fine arts with Victorian influences. Because the British had started most of these railways, walking into these stations was like stepping into a palace, because in a way, they were palaces monuments to Argentina's golden age. Now, here's where it gets interesting. While the United States was rolling out sleek streamliners like the Burlington Zephyr and Santa Fe Super Chief in the 1930s and 40s, those gorgeous Art Deco bullets with their chrome-nosed diesel locomotives, Argentina was building something equally impressive, but different. They used a broader gauge track than the US standard, massive 5 feet 6 inches wide, borrowed from the British. Everything was bigger, more substantial, built to last. The fall, when everything went wrong, fast forward to 1948. Juan Perón becomes president and decides to nationalize the entire railway network. The government takes over from the British and other foreign operators, creating Ferrocarril's Argentino-Sargentine Railways. At first, this wasn't necessarily bad. The government invested in modernization throughout the 1960s and early 70s. They bought new rolling stock, updated infrastructure, and kept things running relatively smoothly. Here's a fun comparison. In the 1940s and 50s, when American railroads were buying EMD units and E-units, those iconic streamlined diesels that looked like they belonged in a sci-fi movie, Argentina was still investing heavily too. They bought beautiful stainless steel coaches from the Budd Company in 1951, the same manufacturer making equipment for American railroads. These coaches had carpeted floors, reclining seats, Venetian blinds, individual lights, even speakers in the seats. They ran express services to Mar del Plata in about 5 hours. Argentina was competing with the best in the world. But then came the 1970s and 80s. Military juntas, economic chaos, and the railways. They became a punching bag for every cost-cutting measure imaginable. But by the 1980s, while American railroads were transitioning to second generation, diesels and freight was booming. Argentina's railway system was hemorrhaging money. In 1990, the government revealed the network was losing about $355 million per year. That's almost $1 million every single day. The numbers tell a devastating story. In 1960, Argentine trains carried 539 million passengers. By 1990, that number had dropped to 264 million. During the last year of state administration before privatization, there were 239,000 services, either delayed or canceled. Then came President Carlos Menem in the early 1990s, with perhaps the most devastating policy for Argentina's railways. His administration privatized everything, and I mean everything. The state-owned Ferrocarriles Argentinos was broken up into 6 divisions and sold off to private companies through concessions. Menem had a famous quote that became terrifyingly real. "Ramal Q para, Ramal Q Sierra. Railways that go on strike will be closed." And close them he did. Between 1990 and the late 90s, the railway network was reduced to 1/4 of its capacity. Long-distance lines disappeared almost completely. 793 railway stations closed. 70,000 railway workers lost their jobs. Entire towns were left isolated. Places that had grown up around the railway suddenly found themselves cut off from the rest of Argentina. Young people left their hometowns searching for opportunities elsewhere because the trains that had connected them to the world were gone. The privatization disaster? Now, you might think privatization would fix things. After all, private companies are supposed to be efficient, right? Motivated by profit, surely they'd invest in the infrastructure and make it work. Nope. The private companies that took over the urban commuter lines around Buenos Aires, like Metropolitano, which grabbed the Roca line, had one goal: extract as much money as possible while investing as little as humanly feasible. They received massive government subsidies, pocketed the cash, and let everything fall apart. By the mid-2000s, passengers were riding in coaches that looked like they'd survived a war. Paint peeling, broken seats, no air conditioning, sometimes no doors. The trains that ran were unreliable, frequently delayed, and occasionally dangerous. Then came the tragedies. In 2011, the Flores train crash. In 2012, the once tragedy where 51 people died and over 700 were injured when a train crashed into the station platform. These weren't just accidents, they were the inevitable result of decades of neglect. The Argentine government finally said enough. They started revoking concessions, taking back control of the lines, and in 2014 created Trenes Argentinos to manage the commuter network. The Japanese solution: here's where our story takes a fascinating turn. Remember those 40-year-old trains I mentioned at the start? Back in 1985, when Argentina was still trying to modernize despite economic chaos, the government under President Raúl Alfonsín made a smart decision. They partnered with Japan to electrify parts of the Roca Line suburban network. This wasn't just buying trains, it was a complete technology transfer agreement with the Japan International Cooperation Agency, a consortium led by Nippon, Sharyo, and Toshiba, along with Tokyo Car, Kawasaki, Kinki Sharyo, and Hitachi, built 102 electric multiple-unit cars in Japan. Then, something really cool happened. Argentina's own Fabricaciones Militares built 54 more units domestically, using the Japanese technology. This was genuine knowledge transfer, not just a purchase. These Toshiba trains were cutting-edge for 1985. They were the first electric trains in Argentina to run on 25,000-volt alternating current using overhead lines. They had an automatic train stop safety system. They could hit 120 kilometers per hour. And here's the kicker: they were based on the Odakyu 9000 series, which was running successfully in Tokyo. On November 6, 1985, President Alfonsín himself rode the inaugural journey from Constitution to Avellaneda Station. The new electric service was a massive improvement over the old diesel push-pull trains. People loved them. Demand spiked so hard that Argentina had to build additional cars just to handle all the passengers. Now, to put this in perspective, in 1985, American railroads were running second-generation diesels like EMD's SD42-2 and GE's U30C4 freight. Passenger service was largely handled by Amtrak with equipment from the 1950s and 60s, plus some new stuff. Meanwhile, Argentina was installing Japanese electric technology that was contemporary with what was running in Tokyo. For a brief moment, Buenos Aires had commuter trains as modern as anything in the developed world. The bizarre present, then everything fell apart during privatization. The Toshiba trains survived, but barely. The private company Metropolitano ran them into the ground. Metal seats were replaced with cheap plastic. Regular maintenance was skipped. The trains that had once been pristine became tired and worn. And here's the crucial part: they kept running. Those Japanese-built trains from 1985 just kept going. By 2013, when the Argentine government took back control and started planning serious infrastructure improvements, they faced a problem. The Roca line desperately needed modernization. The network was falling apart. But they also needed to keep 500,000 daily passengers moving. So they made a plan. They'd electrify the entire Buenos Aires to La Plata, segment about 45 kilometers of brand new infrastructure. They'd rebuild stations, raise platforms, install modern signaling systems, create underpasses at road crossings, lay new concrete sleepers, and install welded rail joints. The whole thing would cost about $500 million. And for the trains, they'd buy brand new Chinese electric multiple units from CSR Corporation, 300 shiny new coaches with air conditioning, CCTV cameras, intelligent doors, ABS braking, and all the modern amenities you'd expect. These started arriving in 2015 and entered service in June of that year. Perfect solution, right? New infrastructure, new trains, everyone's happy. Well, yes and no. See, those Toshiba trains from 1985, they were still running. In fact, about 20 full train sets were still in daily service as of 2016. They'd exceeded their planned 30-year lifespan, but they worked. So Argentina did something wonderfully practical and slightly absurd. They just kept using them alongside the new Chinese trains. Picture this. You're standing on the platform at Constitution Station in Arlingiti. The brand new electrified line to La Plata has just opened. You might catch one of the sleek new Chinese CSR trains with all the modern features. Or you might catch a Toshiba train that's older than many of the passengers riding it, still soldiering on with its 1985 technology. Why this actually makes sense. Now, before you think this is completely crazy, let's talk about why this is actually kind of brilliant. First, those Japanese trains were built to last. Japanese manufacturing in the 1980s was legendary. These weren't cheaply made units. They were over-engineered, workhorses designed for Tokyo's punishing commuter network. The fact that they're still running 40 years later in Buenos Aires is a testament to how well they were built. Second, Argentina couldn't just throw them away. The country's economy has been, let's say, challenging for decades. When you're dealing with inflation, currency crises, and limited budgets, you don't scrap something that still works. Even if it's old, if it runs, you use it. Third, both the old Toshiba trains and the new CSR trains run on the same 25,000-volt overhead system. They can use the same infrastructure. The Toshibas required some update cell ED destination signs instead of the old roll signs. Some maintenance improvements, but fundamentally, they could keep rolling. Compare this to the United States in the same era. When Amtrak wanted to replace aging equipment, they often had to completely rebuild infrastructure because old and new weren't compatible. Argentina accidentally created a situation where old and new could coexist. In 2018, the government approved purchasing 200 more modern EMU cars specifically to replace the aging Toshiba fleet. But guess what? As of recent reports, those Toshiba trains are still running. Because when you've got infrastructure that needs to move 1 million people a day, you use every available train. The bigger picture, here's what makes Argentina's railway story so fascinating. It's a microcosm of the country's entire modern history. You've got the golden age when Argentina was genuinely wealthy and forward-thinking, building infrastructure that rivaled anything in Europe or North America. Then you've got the slow decline through political instability and economic mismanagement. Then the catastrophic privatization that destroyed decades of development in the name of efficiency. Then the painful process of trying to rebuild and modernize with limited resources. And through all of it, those trains keep running. Today, you can ride from Buenos Aires to La Plata on infrastructure that represents 3 different eras, tracks and stations from the Golden Age, electrification technology from the 1980s, and new improvements from the 2010s. You might do it in a train that's older than your parents, or in one that arrived from China last year. There's something almost poetic about it. The Roca line, which started in the 1860s, connecting the capital to the provinces, is still doing its job. The stations, built when Argentina dreamed of becoming a superpower, are still standing. And those Toshiba trains from 1985, built during a brief moment when Argentina tried to modernize, despite everything, they're still carrying people to work every day. Lessons and comparisons, let's throw in one more American comparison for fun. Remember those EMDE units that were pulling streamliners in the 1950s? Beautiful locomotives, icons of American railroading. Many of them were scrapped by the 1970s. Union Pacific kept a few for heritage service, but mostly, when they got old, they disappeared. Argentina couldn't afford that luxury. When something worked, you kept it working. You maintained it, you repaired it, you maybe added a fresh coat of paint if you were lucky. The Toshiba trains got the plastic seat upgrade, if you can call it that. They got LED signs. They got sent to workshops for repairs. But they kept running. Is it ideal? Absolutely not. Should a modern commuter system rely on 40-year-old rolling stock? Of course not. But given Argentina's economic reality, the fact that they've kept the system running at all is actually impressive. And here's the thing, passengers don't really care that much about the age of the train, as long as it's safe, reasonably comfortable, and gets them where they need to go. The Toshiba trains still do that. They're not as nice as the new Chinese units, sure, but they beat not having service at all, which was the reality during the worst years of privatization. Today, Argentina's railways are in a state of cautious revival. The government has been slowly reopening branch lines that were closed in the 1990s, reconnecting towns that had been isolated for decades, buying new rolling stock from China, renovating stations, electrifying more lines. But it's expensive. The government essentially subsidizes 95% of the cost of running the trains, with passengers paying only about 5%. That's not sustainable long-term, but it's keeping the system alive. The long-distance trains have mostly returned to services to Mardel, Plata, Rosario, Cordoba, and Tucumán are running again with new Chinese-built coaches. The famous tourist trains like the Train to the Clouds in Salta and the End of the World train in Ushuaia continue to operate, bringing in tourism revenue. Even the TR in Patagónico, the last long-distance passenger train in Patagonia, still makes its 18-hour journey from Vedma to Bariloche every week. It's slow, it's old, but it connects communities that have no other public transportation. And during emergencies like volcanic eruptions or snowstorms, it's been a literal lifeline. So why does Argentina use 40-year-old trains on a brand new line? Because they're still there, because they still work. Because Argentina can't afford to waste anything that functions. Because those Japanese engineers in the 1980s built something so robust that it's outlasted 3 decades of economic chaos, privatization, disasters, and infrastructure neglect. It's not the story Argentina wanted to tell. The country wanted to be the success story, the South American powerhouse with gleaming modern trains racing across the pampas. Instead, they got a more complicated narrative, one of resilience, of making do with what you have, of patchwork solutions and brilliant improvisation. But you know what? There's something admirable about it. Those Toshiba trains are still carrying people to work. The Roca line, despite everything, is still functioning. Argentina's railways never completely died, even when they came close. The brand new electrification project alongside 1985 rolling stock isn't a failure. It's a snapshot of a country still fighting to rebuild its infrastructure, still working with the pieces it has left from better times, and still moving forward one train at a time. And honestly, given everything Argentina has been through, the fact that you can still catch a train from Buenos Aires to La Plata, whether it's a shiny new Exto Chinese unit or a vintage Japanese warrior, is kind of a miracle.